Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com, setting the record straight about climate. Reporters at the Washington Post have determined that kids are terrified, anxious, and depressed about climate change. And they ask the question, whose fault is that? Well, that question isn't a very hard one. It's people like the Washington Post who are intentionally making children terrified, anxious, and depressed about climate change. A few months ago, they ran an article saying Ocasio-Cortez says the world will end in 12 years. She is absolutely right. And the New York Times says, panic may seem counterproductive, but in the case of climate change, we're at a point where alarmism and catastrophic thinking are valuable. This looming catastrophe demands an aggressive global response now. And we see articles like this in the press every single day. Alarming new map shows large swaths of New Zealand towns and cities underwater by 2050. They've taken a generation of children who lived the safest and most comfortable lives of any generation in history and have scared them about some apocalypse which they say is going to happen in the future. They propagandize children to be frightened, and then they weaponize them to be used to make other children frightened too. They spent decades trying to make people panicked and depressed, and they describe it as feeling hopeful. According to the Sierra Club, in the year 2018, the United Nations said that we have about 12 years to avoid catastrophic climate change, which is exactly the same thing which the United Nations said in 1989. If the United Nations 1989 predictions would have come true, Greta Thunberg never would have been born. The UN has done everything they can to drive children into clinical depression and drug dependency, and they describe what they've done as hope emerges. So the Washington Post asked, whose fault is it? They've taken a generation of comfortable, safe children and intentionally terrified them about the future. And they refuse to allow the children to hear any other points of view. The children don't know that the greatest explosion of life on Earth occurred 540 million years ago when carbon dioxide was right at its peak of 7,000 parts per million. If the children knew that, they would realize that the Extinction Rebellion is nonsense and that they're completely safe. The children aren't allowed to be told that NASA says Earth is getting greener as carbon dioxide increases in the atmosphere. If they knew that, they would realize that carbon dioxide is a good thing. Carbon dioxide makes their garden grow faster, and it makes it so that we can feed more people. Children aren't allowed to be told that Australia has gotten wetter over the last 120 years. If they knew that, then they would realize that people in Australia are going to be just fine. So why are the children being lied to, and why aren't they allowed to hear other points of view? H.L. Mencken explained this over 100 years ago. He said, the whole aim of practical politics is to keep the populace alarmed and hence clamorous to be led to safety by menacing it with an endless series of hobgoblins, all of them imaginary. Things are going very well in America under President Trump, and the Democrats understand that the only way they have any chance of getting power back is by making people terrified. So they're pushing this imaginary hobgoblin of climate change very hard. And they understand that the key to regaining power is by frightening children. Skeptics like myself are working very hard to get the message out to children and to the general public that they are completely safe from carbon dioxide. But progressives and Democrats are doing everything they can to make sure that the message of hope doesn't get through to the children. Democrats are not only censoring climate skeptics, but they're actively targeting them. President Obama's Secretary of the Interior openly threatened anyone working for her who was a climate skeptic. This is a tweet from yesterday by Roger Pilkey Jr. of the University of Colorado. He said, Katherine Hayhoe, Texas Tech prof, endorses skeptical science and warns academics who have views that may differ from hers and theirs to silence themselves lest they be held accountable and suffer consequences. So anyone in academia who tells the truth about climate is being actively threatened. I make all kinds of videos telling children not to be scared, and Democrats in Congress want me silenced. They want me kicked off of YouTube. They've worked very hard to make children frightened and depressed, and they don't want anybody interfering with what they've done. And it's all about their prophecies of the future. You may be fine now, but 12 years from now, everybody's going to be dead. In 1974, during the global cooling scare, MIT professor Jule Charney said, I don't think we can predict climate now, and I wouldn't trust anyone who said he could. The atmosphere is just too complex to take some of these vague statistics and try to use them to predict with. You can always find a single physical mechanism that will cause one thing or another, but when you take them all together, it gets too complicated. Anyone who says he can tell you more than a few days ahead of time what the weather is going to be is practicing necromancy, which is talking to the dead. In 1841, Charles Mackay said, During seasons of great pestilence, men have often believed the prophecies of crazed fanatics that the end of the world was come. And right there is the face of a crazed fanatic. So the Washington Post wants to know whose fault it is that children are depressed. Well, it's your fault, Washington Post. Democrats are willing to sacrifice an entire generation of children in order to regain control of the White House. The election is only 9 months away, and we need to take our country back from these dangerous people. President Trump proposed a budget yesterday with huge budget cuts to organizations like NOAA, which tamper with data and lie about the climate. We need to make sure that next January Democrats are out of power in Congress so that President Trump's budget can get passed. People who are willing to abuse children like this for political purposes have absolutely no place in Washington, D.C. Visit Toto on the web at realclimatescience.com. He's been pulling back the curtain on junk science and propaganda for a long time.